Welcome to part 2 in the creation of the Dwarven Axe, where in this video we'll continue off from where we left off last time, creating the handle, and then this video we're going to go complete the blade and complete the Dwarven Axe. So here we find ourselves kind of where we left off. Immediately I'm going to go and hide the main handle that we created last time so that it does not interfere in the creation of the blade. To begin with, I'm going to go and create a rectangle out of my spline tools, and I'm going to convert this to an editable spline. Here, I'm going to ensure that each of the bottom vertices finds itself at the origin, which is where I've gone and placed my blade, exactly at the origin. This is going to make symmetry a lot easier because I know exactly that symmetry should occur at the origin. Next, I will go and move my vertices, or my control vertex, up to the position where it should be, and then go and adjust the tangent handles in order to get a nice curvature on each edge. At this point, I'm going to increase the amount of interpolation in order to give me a few more edges along these shapes, which are going to be used to create the curvature. Next, I'm going to remove my selection type and add a modifier called Extrude, in which I will go and give this a height equal to that of half the width of the blade. I also want to store this number in memory here. This is my memory, not the computer's. I want to remember this. I want to make sure that I'm aware of this number because it's going to be important in a moment. We're going to come back and revisit this. I'm now going to convert this to an editable poly, and I'm going to go and remove the faces that aren't going to be needed. These are the faces at the back, bottom, and inside, all of which are going to be reproduced once the Symmetry Modifier has been applied. Once they're deleted, we get a little bit more of a cleaner shape. I'm going to enter X-ray mode, enter my front camera, switch over to vertices, and enable the Cut tool. With the Cut tool enabled, I'm going to go and start creating vertices that match along with the shape of the blade's bevel. This is what makes the blade sharp. Now, if I were making something that was meant to be machined or created by machines and not created by hand, this would not be a very good way to go. And the reason for that is that this is going to create slight imperfections. Now, I'm okay with imperfections, as this, while made by dwarves in the bowels of a mountain, would probably not be machine perfect. I'm going to adjust some of my points here to ensure that they are nice and straight and evenly distributed, or something like that. And I also need to ensure that I have topology in place to create this bevel. To do that, I'm going to take my last vertex and line it up with the bevel. This is going to unevenly distribute the vertices up here, so I can also go and redistribute them a little bit, again, to try and give me a little bit of uniformity. With that done, I'm going to return to my Cut tool, and I'm going to begin, again, cutting my way down along with this shape. I'm also clicking at every instance where there is a vertex. This is going to give me pairs of vertices that can then be connected in order to create the quads that are going to define this shape. At this point, I have a mismatch in position here. This should be lined up a little bit closer with the blade. This is going to produce an uneven distribution of my vertices. So like I did with the actual blade portion, I am going to just go and readjust these things a little bit, repositioning these vertices until we get a more even distribution along this shape. Again, that works. There's also a vertex here being used to create the curvature in the blade portion. Now, we don't actually need this. We're going to add it in later. The reason for that is that I need to remove this edge to create the sharpness. And if I do that, the edge that is here creating that curvature doesn't make any sense. So if I remove it first, followed by removing the edge to create the sharpness, I can then go and replace this edge, not deforming that area. So this is an order of operations that is going to make my life a little bit simpler. I'm going to purposely leave this face as an N-gon in order to allow myself a little bit of an easier time cleaning it. Next, we can go and take our face and we're going to extrude it, moving it inwards. Again, some value that I'm going to remember, as it again is going to become important. So I'm going to go like that and remove the new faces like so. In fact, I can even go and remove the large N-gon. Now, in doing so, I've actually removed a very large portion of my blade, but that's okay, because what I'm going to do now is go and create a couple of tubes. The tubes are going to give me the holes in the blade. To begin with, we'll create the larger one, and I'm going to go and give it some properties. I want to make sure, in looking at it, that I'm not going too dense with the topology. And I want to set its height to match that of the width extruded of the blade minus the extrusion that I went inward. So those are the two numbers that I was remembering. Once I have that down, I'm going to convert this to an editable polygon, hold Shift and clone it to the other position, where I'm going to go and scale it down using only the X, Y handle. I also want to ensure that these two are positioned exactly at 0 in Z. This will line them up at the halfway point of my blade. Now in the concept art, it appears that these things are not perfectly centered where they should be, and thus they are going to be mismatched with my geometry. I'll attach both of these tubes together, and we're going to begin by removing the outer shell, the rear face, and then we can start removing the bottom half. This is going to create what is going to become the rest of the bottom of the blade. So if I take my blade and I go and attach these to it, I now have everything needed in order to create the rest of my shape. All I need to do is now just join these shapes, and that will create my blade. So if I start at the innermost edge and we extrude down by holding Shift, I can go and place this edge at 0 in Z and align it in Z as well to make sure that it is actually perfectly aligned with that area. Again, it's not perfect here, and we are going to have to make some changes to it. I might bring this up a little bit, and maybe we'll take this one, and I'm going to reset my X form in order to convert this the right way. We're going to set this in X, and let's find out where our side position is. Let's take the position of this and make it match. I'm going to take the sidemost edge of both of these circles, this one and the little one, and I'm going to bridge them. I'll take the next two and I'll bridge them. I'll take the outermost two and I can bridge them. And this has now created that bottom edge that Symmetry will take care of. I'll go and bridge these two shapes. And now we just need to go and fill in this hole. So I'm going to select my border and I'm going to hit Cap. Now this has gone and created a very large N-gon, which is not something we need to worry about. It looks like I didn't do my math correctly here, and this is not lined up the way that it should be. I'm just going to go and force it to be lined up in the right way. Yeah, there's something amiss. I gotta go and select all of my faces. The numbers that I remembered were not the numbers that I actually needed to remember, apparently. And this has gone and created a very ugly distortion in this shape. I'm just going to align this with Y so that I do get it to be perfectly linear. And now we can actually go and start cleaning this up a little bit more and creating shapes that are going to be a little bit more useful. So I'm actually not going to need anything to do with the inside of this shape here. This outer edge of this circle is actually pretty pointless. And if I go and remove it, we'll actually start getting a little bit cleaner geometry. Remove this edge as well. And then I'm going to target weld this vertex up here. Just a little bit of cleaning. Pull that one down. And the same is going to hold true over here, right? This edge is not going to do anything for us. We'll remove it, but first I'm going to go and try and clean up as much of this as I can. I'll pull that one over there. And now I should be able to remove this now that it's not doing anything. And again, we'll go into our vertices here and begin to clean up. Now you can see the smoothing groups are going absolutely haywire. And that's because we are removing border edges, which are actually converting. Let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4. I think that's okay. We're going to go into here. Let's just go here. We've removed some of the faces or some of the edges that were bordering some of the smoothing groups. And as a result, we ended up with faces that are now joining smoothing groups. So we're going to now go into our smoothing groups here. I'm just going to run an auto smooth to fix this up and check for distortions. I do have some in the blade, which was expected, and that's why I left that as an N-gon. So I can go and clean that. And now we need to clean the N-gon itself, which is going to result in a cleaner shape there. So I just went and connected these edges in order to remove anything that wasn't 4-sided or 3-sided. And there we have now the completed version of 1/8 of the blade. In order to mirror this over to create the rest of this, I'm going to go and adjust my pivot point. I'm going to place it using the little sliders at the bottom of the screen to 0, 0, 0. And now I have the ability of applying a symmetry modifier in X, Y, and Z, provided I get the axes correct. We should end up with the entirety of the blade. Now, this is not actually it for the entirety of the blade. There's actually a few little hiccups here that were caused by the symmetry modifier. First is the additional edges that are not needed, which run along the outer edge. Now, I do need the one that is the blade. This center edge is needed. So I can go and remove that. I also want to ensure to remember to remove all of those. So every single edge created by the symmetry needs to be removed. With that done, the next error that I'm getting is in my smoothing groups. Because I symmetried this mesh over, it also copied the smoothing groups from one side to the other. This is resulting in a blade that looks rounded instead of sharp. To fix this, we need only correct the smoothing of one single side of the face. So we'll go and select all of the polygons that make up one side of the blade. I'm using Shift here in order to paint my selection. And I'm just going to auto smooth these ones, resulting in a really nice, clean, and more important, sharp looking blade. Before I complete the blade, I'm going to go and create the little broken chip that's here, adding a little bit of personality to this blade. To do that, we're going to be going back to our cut tool. I'm going to start at this vertex and just go and reproduce the shape of that cut on the blade. I'm then going to switch to my back camera, and I'm going to go and reproduce this cut. Now, I don't actually need these to snap to the other ones. They just need to be in the same place. Like so. Now, I'm going to remove the border edge, and I'm going to then go and connect each pair. I'll then go and select those faces and give them a new smoothing group set. This should correct the wobble in the blade. And now I just want to go in and get rid of any kind of weirdness that we're getting, and n-gons here in the blade. So I'm going to go and try and keep these a little bit closer to their original shape. And then I'm just going to grab these bottom pair and connect them. It's going to isolate those triangles. I'll take the outer edges, vertices, and connect them here, making edges. And I'll take the center one and I'll connect it as well. That should now give us a really nice chip in the blade without any real smoothing group issues. Like so. With that, we can call the blade done, and we can begin working on some of the other details. I'm going to go and hit the Celtic knot that is in the middle. To create this, I'm going to use a spline line, and I'm going to go and just trace out along the center of this shape. As I do, I'm hitting every corner with a new vertex, and this includes where these shapes end. This is going to ensure that I have all of the geometry needed to create this shape in a way that is going to look the way that it's meant to. Now, again, if this shape were machine-made and not created in an organic way like this, this would actually be a lot more accurate than it is now. And just tracing the shape using the concept art here as reference, we end up with something that's a little bit wobbly, a little bit kind of off kilter. I'm going to go in and now remove the edges that are not a part of this design. So in this case, it appears that I forgot two edges here. I'm going to go use Refine to put a couple more vertices in here. And again, I want to remove any segment of line that is not a part of this pattern. So if I just go kind of once over the pattern here, we can do this so that I have all of these now separate segments. One more. With that done, I'm going to go into my rendering tab. I'm going to turn on rendering viewport, and I'm going to switch over to rectangular. I'm going to increase the width until this matches about the size and dimensionality of the shape. And then I'm going to go and refine by selecting my vertices and just kind of shifting them about a little bit until the pattern actually makes sense. Now again, this would actually be pretty symmetrical in terms of its shape and design. And a lot of these vertices are not symmetrical, but because this was made by a dwarf in a cave under a mountain, I presume that that slight imperfection we see is actually part of the look of this thing. At least it exists in the concept art, and so I want to make it exist in the mesh as well. So I'm just going in and looking for any places like this where the mesh is interfering with itself, where the geometry is going past itself. And I want to just go and reduce that down a little bit so that it no longer interferes. So we're not getting any pass-through in the geometry. I'm also trying to be a little attentive to the fact that this does have a lip here where this thing is going to need to exist. So it's going to have to live on that blade without going too far. So this is not too bad like this. I'm going to go and bring this forward. And I want to get to the point where it just barely is going inside our shape here. We don't want to waste too much topology on the inside shape. I'm going to convert it to an editable poly. In my top view, using my polygons, we're just going to select everything. And then I'm going to hold Alt and deselect the bottom half. This is going to select just the internal faces, which we know we don't need. I'll do the same thing again. I'll select everything, and this time I'm going to Alt select the top half to give me just the front facing edges. Here I can go and create the inset. And then I can go and create the extrusion. Actually, before we do that, I'm going to go and pull these faces out a little bit. And then I'll create the inset. And then I'll create the extrusion. The extrusion is going to go inward. And then we can go and do a little bit of cleanup. So again, there are faces here that are unnecessary. And these vertices can actually be aligned to X now and make sure that they're inside that area. Okay. That reads pretty well as being that detail. I'm going to ensure that its pivot point, like everything else in this scene, is centered. This is going to allow me to, again, throw a symmetry modifier on, which will create the other side, and we'll create the other two sides. I can convert this to an editable poly, and that detail is now done. Next, we'll go and create the shape that lives on top of this box. To do that, I'm going to return the box to the scene by unhiding all. And I'm going to set the box to be transparent. Now in this case, I need to move the concept art to line up better with my geometry. And I can now go and start creating this. Now, unlike the Celtic knot that was created by following the center of the pattern, this shape is going to be created using a line and tracing out the pattern. Now, the pattern to me actually looks to be symmetrical with a center line, so that's good. We're going to just create the top half of this thing. I'm going to turn off my render and viewport so that I can see just my edges. And I'm going to go and start creating the shape here that will define this pattern. Now, I'm trying to keep this low enough poly that we are not going to end up with a billion vertices in this area. I'm going to go and create the very first shape, convert it to a spline, and instead of creating another spline, I'm going to go into my spline properties and create another line. This is going to remove the need down the road to attach all the splines together. In this type of workflow, they already are all connected together. So then it's just a matter of tracing out the shape, which is a little tedious, takes a little bit of time, but is absolutely necessary in making sure that we get this thing to look the way that it was intended to look. Here, I've got a couple of vertices that are going to be too close together. We'll go and adjust that once we start cleaning this up. Also, on occasion, because of how long and tedious it is to make something like this, I will often go quicker than I should. And as a result, I may actually click and drag instead of just clicking. The resulting effect in 3DSMax is going to create a Bezier corner on that vertex and not a corner. This will create a round curved shape that we cannot have. So those two are going to need to be cleaned once we get there. For now, I'm just interested in copying the shape. You'll also notice that I went just past halfway and then cut the shape off. Again, I'm going to use a symmetry modifier right down the middle to make the bottom. There isn't actually a point in making anything beyond that. Again, were this something that was machined, this would be far more accurate and precise in its creation. But since we're dealing with something that was made by dwarven hands, the imperfections here are going to actually help to sell this as being something made a little bit more by a blacksmith and not something that was made by machines. Again, you could take the time to make it look far more accurate and precise in terms of the shapes that you're creating. But in this case, I feel like it fits the look of this object to have those imperfections in place. Okay. So we're nearing completion here of the first half of this thing. And I've been trying to pair my vertices as I go around. So wherever I see one on the opposing edge here, I'm trying to create them on this edge as well. That's not always going to be the case. And as a result, we're going to end up with some pretty funky topology once we're done creating all of these things. For that reason, we're going to need to employ a pretty interesting method of cleaning this. So there is now that shape kind of built. I'm first going to adjust its pivot point, and like everything else, place it in the center. Now I can also see that the center here is not centered with this jewel. And so I'm going to move this down until it is more centered with where this gem is. Again, just to make it fit that pattern a little bit better. With that done, I'm going to bring my shape forward. We're going to go and set our box to be opaque again. And this is just so that I can actually see. Come on. There. This is so I can actually just see the shape. I just want it to pop and disappear. That's going to make sure that it's inside the geometry. We can then go and place an extrude modifier on it, which is going to extrude it outwards into our shape. And we'll go give it a little bit of thickness. Something of that nature. I can see here too that it's actually gone a little bit larger than my border. And so I'm just going to, with my scale tool, scale it in a little bit. Now you'll notice that in some places here, I have a lot of edges. Again, this is as a result of my being in a hurry with my edge tool or my line tool and clicking and dragging. The resulting effect is that we have some smoothed or some Bezier corners on this. To find them, I can just select every vertex on this object, all the vertices, and you'll notice the ones that have green or where that curvature is. I'm simply going to right click and head to the corner mode, and that'll switch them all into corners. Now our extrusion should be a lot lower in its polygon count and fit a little bit better. There's still a few places where some edges probably don't need to exist. I'm going to convert this to an editable poly. I'm going to go to my top view, and like we did before, I'm going to select everything and deselect the front, delete the back. This will make sure that we don't have any internal faces. I'm then going to place a turn to poly modifier on here. Turn to poly is going to allow me to modify the topology of this object, keeping it quadded, provided I turn on limit the polygons to 4-sided. Now this tool isn't perfect, and it can create irregular polygons if you're not careful. And there are some choices that it makes that I don't fully understand, that I would have gone in a different direction. But for the most part, this is actually going to work fairly well. Here I can now convert this to an editable poly. I can apply my Symmetry Modifier, making sure to do this in the right axes, and convert that to an editable poly as well. We now have that shape, and I'll go make this a different color here so you can see it a little bit easier on the blade of the same color. We now have that shape built in a way that looks nice and accurate. Again, not exactly what you would do if you were doing game level assets. You would probably bake this into a normal map, but if you were baking it from a normal map, you still would have to model it. And so that's why we've gone and created this in this way. Also, this is the exact same process I would use to generate these faces, going and tracing them all out, and then extruding them, deleting the back sides, and cleaning them up. Since the process is identical, I'm not going to bother doing that here in this video. That leaves us with two remaining shapes. We have the rope that covers the edge of the blade, and we have the little candelabra that goes inside the blade there. This kind of little interesting repeating shape here that looks like a candelabra to me. That's what we're going to make. Again, I'm going to return to the shape of a spline to make these. So to begin with, I'll make the rope. I'm not going to bother doing a twisted, braided version of that, as that is something that is far more easily accomplished with a texture. And in that case, it would actually far be easier to do with a texture without having anything here. So we're going to go and create this edge. I'm going to find in my polygon modeling tools, this is where I want the rope to go. And so with the edges selected, inside of my tools under Edit Edges, I'm going to click the Create Shape from Selection button. This is going to convert this selection into geometry. I'm just going to ensure that this is linear here. And now, if we go and look, there's a new object here. This new object is a spline made up of the original edges that were selected. I'm going to go to Rendering, render this in the viewport, and switch it to be radial. I'll adjust its thickness until it matches that of the rope in the concept art. I want to ensure that this thing is smooth properly, so we're going to convert it to an editable poly, select all of the polygons, and clear their polygroups. We'll put this on polygroup number 1. Then I'm just going to go and select the faces that run down the middle and switch this smoothing group. This will ensure that I get a corner where the rope hits the corner of the blade, but that we get a really nice smooth rope everywhere else. Since this was generated from a spline that itself was generated from the geometry of the blade, it shares its pivot point with that of the blade, in this case being the origin. So I don't need to go and move anything, just symmetry this over in X, and that gives me the rope on the other side. Next, we're going to go and create a little candelabra shape. To do this, I'm going to go and move my concept art. We're at a point where we don't need these things to line up anymore. And I first want to note where on this shape it's going to be touching the blade. That's going to be here inside the rope at that point. And then I want to go and count the number of duplicates here. So there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. That makes 14 across the top and bottom. So what I need to do is I need to create one of these shapes, create 13 duplicates, and then curve it around the shape of the blade. To do this, I'm going to begin with a plane. And I'm just going to draw my plane over one of these objects. I'll convert this to an editable poly, and we'll use a simple extrude method to create the rest of this. So holding Shift, I'll drag back, drag back, drag back, and drag back. I can then take this, and we'll drag it out, and rotate it, and drag it out, and rotate it, and drag it forward, and rotate it. And I might even take this one and move it up a little bit. I'll do the same here. This time I'm going to go to just the center point. And we'll go to this center point here as well. Again, bringing this in to a point that it is at least in line with this edge here. We also need to bring this up, at least to the halfway point. And I do want to put another edge in here or two in order to make sure that this is going to deform nicely. And also maybe add a little bit more curvature to this. Grabbing the bottom edge, I'm going to apply Symmetry Modifier, making sure that it is applying it in Y, convert this to an editable poly, and remove my new center edge. This will give me the bottom of the shape. I'll select the bottom edge and symmetry it again, also going in Y, converting that to an editable poly. I now have 2. You remember we needed 14. If I symmetry this again using Y, we have 4. If I select an edge again, always selecting one that is at the edge or the border, that gives us 8. Selecting yet another edge, adding another symmetry, adding another Y, and flipping, and I now have 16. So beautiful, I've gone over by 2. I'll just go and remove 2 of them, and now we have 14. Next, it's about my pivot, and again, we can see that these shapes follow the edge that is where the rope is on that curved piece. So I'm going to need to put my pivot point there. I'm going to go to Effect Pivot Point only, And I'm going to go and move this down to the bottom corner of the shape. Somewhere about there. I'm also going to extrude the shape to give it some thickness. In this case, I'm going to do it with polygons and not with a modifier. This will make sure that there is no back on this shape. And also, in my top view, I don't need any of the faces that make up the side of this object. So anything along this area here doesn't need to be selected. Looks like just that. There we go. So these faces here are also going to end up in the blade. So I can delete those as well. With that done, and our pivot point correctly placed, I'm going to reset the transformation of this object. Going to reset Xform, reset selected, and converting this to an editable poly. If you do not reset the transformation, this method will not work. I'm going to bring this over to where my blade is, and I now need the edge for this object to follow. We'll go and isolate the blade. We'll go into edges, and we'll go and double click, finding that edge all the way around. There we go. And again, I want to ensure that it's only that edge I have selected and nothing else. Here too, we are going to create a shape from selection, making sure again to keep it linear. We can go and select our new edge and remove its rendering in the viewport. This edge is not going to become part of our geometry. This edge is going to be the path that our geometry follows. I'll reset the transformation on the spline as well, and then using a modifier called world space, path deform, I can select my path, I can move my geo to the path, and I can use the stretch to go and compress this into that shape. Now this is going to be imperfect. There are going to be areas here where the vertices are collapsing in on themselves. This is just due to the fact that this shape is longer than the spline used to create it. If you convert this to an editable poly, the modifier will remain. The only way to remove the modifier is to collapse it. With it collapsed, we can now go in and take a look at what needs to be created or fixed. So there are going to be inevitably little areas where the curvature has been broken and places where we have too many edges. I'm simply going to remove edges that are not contributing to this shape. And I'm going to be using the vertices to correct some of the curvature. Again, I'm not aiming for machine accuracy in the precision of the building of this object, just trying to get it to look like that shape. So this should actually not take too long. And most of these areas are pretty decent. Again, there's a few places here where two edges end up too close together. I'm just collapsing in that area to remove one of the edges. You can see as I move all the way down here, most of this is pretty good. And clean that up. Again, a little bit of a wonky shape going on here. We can go and adjust that. Keep it nice and clean. Again, pretty good. There's an edge here that doesn't need to exist. And pull this edge back. Pull this edge back. I'm double clicking to ensure that I get the entire thickness of this thing too as I move it. We've got another edge series here, which doesn't need to exist. Another vertex over here, and this actually looks like the end of it, so that wasn't bad at all. And that then creates this shape. So I'm going to go and pop out of isolation mode. We can delete our reference plane. we can take this new shape, this new pattern that we've created. Its pivot point, again, is inherited from the spline from which it was created. And that spline was created from the axe blade. And so it inherited its pivot from there. And in the end, it's at the origin, which is really nice. So I'll go and throw a symmetry on, and we want a Y and an X. And we're just going to flip those to ensure that they are actually mirroring the right way, so that I can see them all, and then I can convert this to an editable poly. There we have it. The only thing that remains at this point is to do cleanup. Make sure that smoothing groups are all properly assigned, making sure that there isn't any little area that should be smooth that isn't. We also want to clean up n-gons, and we want to make sure that every component is named. And then, at that point, we are done with the Dwarven Axe.